We also have a minivan that is no longer able to get the needed parts in order to have it pass one of our technology vans, but we're going to scrap that now that it's unable to be properly maintained. And then nutritional services, we have an old, a very old short bus that our person over there, delivery person over there, has been driving for a very long time, and it's finally coming to its end, and we're going to scrap it. And we took one of the recently retired student vans and moved that over for him to use now, something a little better, a little safer, a little more easier.
Actually has heat and
yeah,
no.
exactly. Yeah, the windshield wipers work and all that. So those are our obsolete items for this month.
Okay. Any questions, board members?
That lasted 20 years.
We did all right. Got our money's worth out of it. Okay, so we'll move them forward. Any objections? Okay. All right. Next item on the agenda is the Seiler Elementary School Fire Alarm Replacement Project. Kelly, how about you
So I can jump in on this
jump in
one.
on this?
This was part of the capital project list that we bumped until this month. There was a question about the system that they were installing. It's not the same system that we have throughout the rest of the school district. So we had some concerns about that, and the low bidder was substantially lower than the others. So we confirmed that this company, Fidelity, is a viable contractor for the service, and the product that they are proposing to install is Honeywell, not Simplex like we have throughout, but it will satisfy our needs. It wouldn't be the preferred system, but it will satisfy the specification for the bid.
Okay.
There were questions about compatibility with that. We've also confirmed that it can talk to our other systems as needed.
Okay.
The only other things to consider are serviceability of that. So our vendor that we have contracted to do services of fire alarms, if there's any specialty programming, we may have to have somebody else to do that, would be an additional expense. These are all things to put into your consideration. Do we approve this bid for them? The only other alternative would be to reject it and to delay this till next year to go out to rebid to see if the Simplex system would come in at a lower price. This fire alarm isn't currently failed, it's just in the needs category because it's a life safety system. It's has some issues in the past, but it is a functional system. We could delay it if the board would choose to do that.
Okay. Comments, questions, concerns?
Can you describe the difficulties that the system has had in the past?
With my limited history, not so much, but my understanding is, so I believe it's a Siemens system, so it's not the same as we have in our other buildings, which was another reason to try to get that conformity. I can tell you from my past, Siemens charges about $800 just to show up to service the system, no matter how long. I think that gives them up to 4 hours, but they block out a 4-hour window, their minimum charge, travel time, get to the site, and not including any additional parts required to make repairs.
You said it may not be serviceable by the company that services our other ones, so you don't know for sure? You didn't
So
find
the-
out from them if they can service this one?
So about functionality, that's what we were confirming. We're looking at, can it talk to the other systems? It does use a BACnet protocol to talk to our other systems in the building. Servicing it, it's not parts that are readily available through our current vendor, which is Johnson Controls Simplex. Are they readily available? I'm going to assume they are, just like any others, but it's not something we stock. Like in our other buildings, we stock certain smoke detectors, pull stations, just as a normal practice. With these, we would have to look into getting a supply of those in hand for whatever the need arises.
And help me recall, because I don't, and I apologize for that. Was the, and I know the Grinnell is the alternate, was the Honeywell in the base bid?
So the
Or
base bid
how did we
was-
get to the Honeywell?
The base bid is a generic specification that calls out certain NFPA protocols.
Gotcha. Okay.
So there's several systems that would satisfy that bid. This one does with the various components.
Okay.
Again, and there are multiple reasons to go out to bid for this, to try to get the same systems, the parts we already have in stock. But again, this one does satisfy the needs. It just makes it a little more challenging for service and having those parts similar to other schools.
Anybody?
But the cost savings of that difference in the, what, $64,000 difference, I guess I would just look at the one above it, right? 176 to 112.
Let me put this
Well-
out there. So one of the complications in evaluating the bidders, the low bidder did not provide an alternate for the Simplex Johnson controls.
Gotcha.
That's my only other salvageable recommendation to potentially get them, is to put this off another year, so that low bidder, we can kind of insist on them to say, you need to give us that alternate. Why it didn't come out this time, no one really has an answer to that. Every other bidder, I think, did supply an alternate bid for the Johnson Control preferred system.
Yeah, there was only one other bidder that did not, well, they were no bid across the
No
board.
bid, yeah.
Yeah.
And your bids here are listed in random order, right? These are just random, are they random or are they?
Alphabetical.
Alphabetical.
Oh, except for the last one.
Not really.
Yeah, not really.
Yeah, I don't know how.
For the most part.
Y'all learn.
It's the new alphabet.
So it's supposed to be alphabetical except for the last one.
Okay.
Okay, so if we didn't go with Fidelity, you would go with the next one up, which would be Westcott? Is that correct? Is Westcott the one that's more in alignment with
Right,
the systems that?
plus the 18.
Right,
Plus
it's the
the
So
fourth column.
it's, so it's 181
So it's not.
as opposed to 112.
The other one's 183. We do that.
Right.
And through this process, trying to vet this out, and we had contact, at least Dewey had contact with Fidelity to say, why didn't you put an alternate in? That was what we asked you to do, to fill in all the blanks, not no bid.
Yeah.
And their answer was, they couldn't get the price from the vendor in time, whether that was their own fault or what it was, they couldn't get those bids in on time. After circling around, and we can't rebid it now, we're asked them to clarify a price.
Right.
It would have been a $10,000 add to their existing price if they had done things in a timely manner
And that's with Fidelity.
with Fidelity.
I have concerns with that.
They weren't able to
Well,
get that together.
I mean, everybody else got it
Right,
together.
everyone had the same amount of time, it was advertised for 3 weeks, they basically had a month to get it together. Why they took so long and didn't get all their ducks in a row, I can't answer that
Well,
question.
and that gives me concerns for using them as a company in
Yeah,
general.
how confident are they going to be? And so, and you haven't, so what, that $10,000 thing that you just said, is that going to be, that is what the amount will be, or no? You still don't know what the amount will be,
We can't
so-
accept that
We
after
can't
the
accept-
deadline.
We can't accept it after the
So it
deadline.
could be
Right.
anything,
Right.
right? It could come back and it could end up being more expensive than,
True,
the other
it-
people?
It could, yes. If we went out to bid again next year, it could be the same numbers, it could be inflated, I wouldn't expect it to go down.
do you think that there was,
Generally, low bidders come in and they have a price to get in there, and then they come in, they
Yeah.
have some extra
yeah,
costs.
that's what I'm
along the way
saying, did
that
they
they're a little more
manipulate
than
this
the
and
low
push that out
costs.
so then,
That are
so they could win it and then?
That is a really good
That
point.
was a concern, it was that much lower, was it about 20% lower than the next bid? And that was a concern, why we weren't really wanting to look into them, their history, and they had to meet a lot of different criteria to even get on this list of their work history, and they have insurance, so they've met all their obligations to work in a school district. It's just questionable why it's that low.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't justify $70,000 for a different system because we, pretty much everyone services Honeywell, right? I mean, it's a generic brand that pretty
I
much
would
everyone
say-
services, and the
right.
parts are cheap and easy to get.
It's not
So-
proprietary in that respect, so I think they're available. I'm just saying, we do have stock of the other fire alarm in all of our buildings, and we could, if this building was short on smoke heads, they didn't have them, we could go to another building and get those parts and bring them here. We have them in-house, that's kind of how we save money, by doing that work in-house. With Siemens, we can't even change a smoke head because they have to be programmed by the Siemens programmer that we don't have or can even get.
Right.
Honeywell, I believe you can do that without a proprietary device. I don't know that as a fact, but I think it is open.
I did some poking at their cut sheet too on the internet, and I couldn't get to there directly, you know, it looks that way, but.
I can't find a way to disqualify them if
Right.
that's what we're looking
Right.
for Honeywell.
Right. So, I don't know. The bids in general are just so wide, and you got
Yeah.
$306,000 to $112. That's such a huge range. It's surprising.
What was the estimate going into this?
I believe I have that. Or actually, I would have to look that up. I believe it was around the 120, 150,000.
Okay.
Which is
So
around
they're
what
in the
Fidelity
ball-
would have
they're in
been
the
if they would
ballpark.
have bid,
Yeah,
right?
$10,000.
Right. Yeah.
What are you paying for? 280 and 250?
So,
So, Mr. Harper, what I hear you saying is that Fidelity meets the specs for the base bid.
They do.
It will be able to communicate with our other information, right?
Correct.
And, from that standpoint. And so your recommendation is to move forward with them, even though you are concerned about the size of the bid and the differences between them, as well as the fact that it will not be the exact same equipment as what we currently have in stock. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And why is suppressions at the bottom? Is it because they don't do and why didn't they do, I know you told us this before. They didn't do the
Alternate.
alternate, that's just because they don't?
It's hard to say why they chose not to do that.
Oh, they just chose not to do it
Every
again?
bidder was asked to completely fill out the bid sheet and do their due diligence and give us what we're asking for. If it's
So-
another 100,000, they should have wrote that.
Right, so all three of them just chose not to do it.
Correct.
I would.
well, I don't know that, we don't know that either,
Okay.
right? There may be some other
An
reason.
extenuating.
I don't know, you know, whether it's poor communication between them and the Grinnell supplier, if that's who they're
Oh,
going
okay.
through, or the Grinnell rep. I don't know.
Oh.
There could be other reasons.
Okay,
That's
right.
why I'm kind of lukewarm to that, you know?
Does Fidelity have a history with school districts?
I think it's limited, but I believe they meet the criteria for what the specs call for work history.
Gotcha. Thank you.
We asked Dewey to look into that specifically, and that might have even gone to our solicitor to say, whatever the work history was, is that enough to disqualify them? I believe the answer is no.
What do you guys think about waiting a year? I mean, is it I mean, safety is a concern for me, so I mean,
My understanding is it's good for another, it's not impending failure today. It's just that it needs to be replaced. It doesn't meet the same specifications as the other buildings in our buildings, life safety systems by NFPA standards. It's the older version that doesn't comply anymore. So when you're looking at life safety, you want to have the up-to-date versions of things.
yeah.
And this one is just not up-to-date. It's not in a failure state.
Yeah, and
Right.
a year is a long
And-
time,
and
but at
this
the
is
same time,
part
I
of the
agree with
6-year
you,
plan.
this is a very widespread of numbers. You have at least 2 people who didn't give you alternate bids. And then if you do commit then to Fidelity or even suppression if you went that high, which is, and you don't know, it could be 30,000, it could be another 50,000, you
Yeah,
just
and-
don't know.
And you can't limit that, I guess, right?
Right, and so then we end up, what if we end
Talking
up,
about change orders.
what if we go with
Yeah,
Fidelity?
You can't cap change orders, I'm guessing, right?
And it's another
They can put them
60,000,
in,
and we're
but-
paying more than we would
Well-
have for.
No, if
No, 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 no,
Fidelity,
no.
You can't
no.
go with,
They can't change the equipment, and
They, I know,
equipment
but you
can't
don't know
change
what
the
the
change
price of
orders.
things
Go.
are.
Unforeseen
In that.
conditions.
that, if I understand right, that base bid includes all the hardware,
Correct.
the Honeywell hardware.
Right.
That's,
But are we not, am I wrong in thinking that the alternates, okay, so that's their cap, right? For the ad amounts.
That's a complete system for what you see there. What you're talking about, change orders, if there's something
Yeah.
unforeseen,
Uh-huh.
if the wires weren't what they expected, or they found some other thing in the wall that was unexpected that no one would have known about,
And that-
that could be a potential.
And that
change.
happens with anything that we do.
And that's true.
Right.
And so, Ms. Thompson,
Right.
the information that Mr. Harper just talked about could happen for any company. And so
Right.
those prices,
Okay.
the fact that there is no bid here does not mean we are beholden to them for an unknown price. It
Okay.
means that they would not provide Johnson Controls. So they would put
Okay.
in the Honeywell system, it would be 112.5 if things don't go
Okay.
right awry.
Well, that-
And that there is an unknown cost that we are taking on. We just simply would not get the Johnson Controls.
Okay.
And based on the bid rules, there really are two options, unless there's another reason to disqualify. We either choose Fidelity,
Right.
and so we go with them at the Honeywell system, or we choose Westcott, because Westcott is the next highest bidder if we assume that we have to take, if we assume we want the alternate.
Correct.
If you want the alternate, you can't take Fidelity.
Right.
And so you have to take Westcott, which is the next lowest.
Right.
You could choose to throw them all away and wait, right? Unless there's another reason to disqualify, which I do not believe there is for either of those two companies.
No.
And so they would be our two options unless we are going to choose to wait.
Okay.
And the recommendation from Mr. Harper is to move forward with Fidelity and to not wait on the system.
Well,
Okay,
if
then I
that's
think
what
we should do
you're
that.
I'm okay with that.
comfortable with,
I guess,
then
I mean, we're talking $64,000 difference. So,
It's,
I would rather not wait a year. with
Yeah, no,
something
I'm
like
okay with it.
that. Equipment.
I agree.
Okay. Peter?
It
I
just
don't
doesn't.
either.
Peter,
All right.
you haven't weighed in. Are you, what's your thought?
I'm a great believer in the Southwest model. For those of you who don't
If it
know
ain't
what
broke,
that
don't
is,
fix it.
Southwest buys only Boeing 737s, no other plane,
Oh, South.
Yeah.
no Airbus, no other 777s or 767s or 87s or anything else. The reason is because of maintenance.
Yeah.
And they have made money
Yeah.
every year, which is something that none of the other airlines do.
Can
actually
can
true.
actually say.
Yeah.
Yeah, except we're
All right.
not in that kind of,
No.
you know, we're not in
But
that
if you apply
security
that,
business.
We
Yeah.
are trying to save money, right, which is what they're doing with
Yeah.
that model. And I think that's was the philosophy with the Grinnell systems.
No.
But $70,000, I don't know that we're
I
saving money,
understand, it is
right?
more money.
The Boeing 737-800, what are the ones?
So
You
if
put all your
it's,
eggs in one
Okay.
basket.
And That's true.
so let's say,
So-
All right, so Joan, where do you stand? Let's figure this.
You
I'm
know,
okay.
If Kelly's comfortable
Right.
and he's the professional that is
Mhm.
evaluating these
Okay.
things, and I'll add that I'm not comfortable waiting a
Okay.
year. Just doesn't,
All right.
I don't, so if you think that it's going to, if you're confident in going forward with
Sure.
them, I would say yes.
Okay.
However, if between now and the board meeting, if you continue to gather information and something comes up and you say, well,
Well, we
you
can
know,
always pull it, yeah.
just,
We can always pull
you
it.
know, let us know, but I would rather not wait.
Sherry?
boy, okay, so I agree. I do not like, I am not comfortable with waiting another year to rebid, considering what it's for. But I'm sorry, but I don't like that they had just as much time. We don't know, this is somewhat unknown. I think Westcott is a better choice, given the two. That's just my
All
opinion.
right, Peter, I think you're in the same
I
boat.
agree with
yeah.
her.
Okay. Dr. Dave?
I don't like
I
spending more money,
think
but.
the $64,000 kind of sold me on it. I mean, I'm okay with it. I mean, if
Okay.
you've done your homework on it, I believe it's okay. I mean, if it talks to the other system, I mean, that's huge. Serviceable, I mean, $64,000 over the course of time, you allocated extra money that's gonna go towards maintenance, if there's any difference, is gonna be that difference of $64,000 or less, I'm assuming, so I can be okay with that.
I'm good with that.
You're good with that?
I have just another question.
Go ahead.
So when you say that this system will talk to the system that we have, what does it rely on to communicate with the other system? Like, could something else, is it relying on our other school wireless system or whatever? Could there be a delay, some kind of a problem where it doesn't function right?
It's a hardwired, it's either a network, but it's internal to the building, communication, and it's phone lines that talk to monitoring. So, and the other part that I just looked up, so the initial cost that was proposed for this, including contingencies, was about 150,000 was the initial estimated cost of this. So this bid is lower than the proposed initial cost with contingencies,
Okay.
just as a perspective. That doesn't change anything. I just didn't know that when you asked me first.
Okay. All right, and I'm good with your recommendation and the low bidder on this. I'd like to move it forward.
I
Okay.
would say the only reason if there's a cut in line, it could be the only difference if you don't have communication or a bad network.
Right, it's gonna be a cut cable, yeah.
Okay, well, that's what I wanted to be sure.
Yeah,
When I
no.
hear that it's gonna have to talk to something else,
No, it,
I get nervous about that
Yeah.
too, so it's not gonna be.
It's a physical
There
connection,
won't be
yeah.
any.
it's a physical connection.
Physical,
Okay.
did you say physical?
It's a physical connection, yeah, it's no wireless.
All right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that will show up
Okay.
on at the board meeting, and we'll move into the engineering project, design, development, and construction RFP results. And Kelly, you're on again.
So just to try to explain some of this green and yellow highlighted scoring sheet, if you look down the left side, it references tabs 2 through 7. And just a brief explanation of that, it fits the model of our RFP. Tab 2 was each vendor's understanding of the services that we're asking for. So we had weights associated with that. Tab 3 was their organization, staffing, and staff qualifications.
Gotcha.
4 and 5 were their project experience and their public project expertise. So they had to list various projects, and we scored them accordingly. Tab 6 were their references, so other school district projects that they've done, the quantity, the size, the dollar amount. We took all those things into consideration for the references. And then finally, the fee proposal, so this is a matrix that uses various weights for each thing. Obviously, fee proposal was the most important, it has the heaviest weights, and that's broken up into several categories, I believe 5 different categories, and each one had its own rating. The first part of that was the year 1 assessment with the 5-year capital improvement plan. That was the biggest initial cost for most people because they'd have to come out, survey every building, and be able to develop what's wrong with this building and build a 5-year plan based on that. The second part of tab 7 was the additional year, so this is a multi-year RFP, so each additional year, how much would it cost them to update that? That's the next line. The next one were average hourly rates. So we asked them to provide different engineering services, civil, HVAC, plumbing, architects, all those, and we averaged those out, and that's how we rated this line item. Then we had their annual inflation, and that was a direct percentage rate, and we used that as some criteria for evaluation. And then finally, the summer project fee and how that played out. So you'll see some different colors there. Not everyone bid on this the way we expected them to. Some people didn't even give us an answer that was expected. Some of them wanted to negotiate at the time of the project, so I just plugged in a number that's actually Reynolds, the very far right column. I gave them the highest percentage because they didn't really give me a straight answer. So I gave them the highest number as compared to everyone else. I didn't know a better, more fair way to do that.
Wait, I'm sorry, what question, what were they not answering?
They did not give us an exact answer for how much they would charge for summer projects. So, for example, this summer we're doing paving at different schools. If that was estimated to be $1 million, there should be an associated construction management fee with that. Some of the others, if we look across the line, Barry Isaac would have given us a 10% fee. So they would have charged 10% of that $1 million project. Crabtree would have did 6.5.
Gotcha.
Dewey had a lump sum plus a percentage, and I can explain how I came up with a 7.04, and so on and so forth across the line. So this is what they would charge us to do construction management, develop the specifications, go out the bid, that whole part of that process of them developing, go out the bid, award the bid, and construction management. That's what this final line item is bid upon. Any questions about that before we go through the matrix?
So why did Remington get 3%?
Remington and 3%.
Yeah, what is the?
Are you looking at the
Annual
inflation?
inflation is 3%, and then theirs was percentage of total.
So inflation was their inflation, let's see how the RFP was worded exactly. So they had to give an inflation amount
So-
for year over year. So if we were perpetually doing this, I don't believe we have an end date to this. It's the initial study. And then year after year, how much would it cost to update this plan? That percentage is their inflation on that rate, year after year, of how much it would cost to, let me make sure I'm using the right words here, if I can find our bid sheet in the packet. All right, so this is, oh, that's summer. So that's just the annual inflation increase for the next 3 years as a percentage. I'm gonna say that would be for the hourly rates. As I look closer at this.
And so that's a number they chose. It's not a number we pulled out of theirs.
Correct.
They said that.
Right.
And so most firms picked a 2%, and the two other firms, one picked a 1 and one picked a
Yep.
3.
Correct.
Now, are they just guessing? Or
Right,
is-
so
or is
some
that-
people could have said CPI or picked a flat percentage
Yeah.
rate. This is the number that they listed in their proposal.
It's their best guess.
And so you're saying that Reynolds didn't guess?
So theirs is the very last line, the summer project fee percent, the one that's in orange at the bottom. Reynolds did not give, they wanted to negotiate every project individually.
Oh, no.
So without, I mean, they could have said it's 20%, they could have said it's 3%. I didn't have a way to fairly score that, so I threw a number of 10 in here, because that was the highest amongst everyone.
Oh, I see what you did, okay.
Why is Remington and Vernick also in that orange color? Because it looked like there was a 7 to 10. Did they differentiate depending on the project?
So they said 7 to 10%, and I'd have to pull their proposal out. I just went with the average.
Got it.
So average of between 7 and 10 is
Right.
8.5.
They
I
didn't
just
give
went in
one
the middle.
number. Right, got it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. And.
So did they say why they wanted to do it individually?
We wanted 4,000 plus.
They wanted to negotiate the best price. Was that our benefit or their benefit? They just said negotiate the price at the time of the projects.
They can find different subs, different prices, different times.
So it was
of
too
year.
much of an unknown for me to plug in
It's
a
all
low
different
number.
times of year, it's all
To me, it's a
scheduled,
risk.
different subs,
Yeah.
different pricing.
So you can take that for what it's worth. I had to plug in a number so I could come up with a final evaluation. I chose 10.
But that makes it hard, right, if they want to negotiate for each individual project.
Yeah.
Can you also,
I
Mr.
mean, you could
Harper?
save a lot of money by negotiating each individual project.
Could go
Or
either
spend
way.
It could go the other way.
Yeah.
Mr. Harper, could you also explain the different types of firms that submitted responses in terms of engineering versus architectural and what that means or doesn't mean as we consider these bids, please?
Right, so of the various people, we put this out to, I can't tell you the total number, more than 20 vendors. There were architects, engineers, construction management firms, and we're really looking more towards an engineering firm because of the specifications, the evaluation of the building structures and the projects we're looking for. There's also an architectural component. So Barry Isaac, they are mainly an engineering firm, so they had to go out and look for an architect if they didn't have one on staff, so that they could give a rate for that type person. When we go to Crabtree, they are primarily architects, so they provide those services. They have some in-house people, but they would have to supplement that with other engineering firms outside. And that satisfies our bid specs as long as we call them, they contact those engineers and provide those services to us seamlessly as if it was in-house.
But I mean,
Project manager.
who more often need engineering services than
Agreed.
architects?
And there was a lot of people that called us up and said, we would like to bid on this. It just isn't a good match. The people that did this building, KCBA, they said, we would really love to bid on this, but this time with their workload, they said it just wasn't a good match for them to bid on this. They didn't think they could provide fair services for us based on the needs that we presented to them. Other companies like Boucher and James, they're typically a civil engineering. I talked to them, they were very interested in this, but they said, they couldn't do it alone, and they were looking for other partners. I know they were pursuing that, but it just didn't work out. And they said, we really wish we could have done this, but we can't fairly serve your needs. So they didn't submit as well. Other people like EI Associates, they do have a lot of in-house staff, but they don't have everything. But I don't know that any one of these firms have every single person in-house. So we're asking for an architect, every type of engineer, structural, mechanical. That's a lot to ask for any firm to have in-house. But for the majority of the people that did bid, they had most of the services or partnered with one other firm or two to have all those under their umbrella. Does that answer your question?
Remington and Vernick, what are they?
Remington?
I just don't know that company.
Remington and Vernick, they are engineers. They're out of
Okay.
Conshohocken. And I believe they also did the same partnership that they partnered with an engineering firm of people they didn't have in-house and architects as well.
Okay. And Reynolds is engineering. It's just because I know that company, right?
Correct.
That's okay.
They're primarily engineering.
Right.
But there was a lot of interest. I'd say with the 6 proposals we did receive, I received 4 to 6 calls from people that said they really wish they could provide the services that we were asking for. They either thought they weren't going to be competitive, it wasn't good timing, it wasn't a good match, but there was a lot of interest in this project for the school district.
We received 39 requests for the RFP document.
Wow.
So was
ton of
it,
interest.
did we not give a long enough time period?
We gave them a month.
But I don't know, is that a long enough, I don't know. I mean, because it's a pretty big proposal.
No one asked for more time, I can say that. I think they had enough time to pull the
So it wasn't a
proposal.
timing issue, it was,
Right, it was timing, it was their time, that either their workload currently was too much or their foreseeable future, or they just didn't feel it was a good match that they could adequately service Pennridge School District.
Are there any other questions about the matrix itself in terms of the information that came in or?
Yep, yep. So maybe, can you walk us through how you arrived at the numbers in yellow? What was your multiplier of factors?
So that's the simple part of this, is the weight. So when we looked at understanding how much weight, we really want them to be in tune with us, know what we're looking for, we put 10% on this. If you look at the highest weights, it was tab 7. What are our totals here? 35,
So-
40, 45.
Right.
So that's the highest weight, the cost. And the biggest components of that was the initial assessment and our summer capital project management and development.
I believe Mr.
Understood.
Kraus is specifically asking, like, if you look at the understanding
Just take
totals,
Barry, take
how
the
do you
first
get
left hand,
1.4,
right.
1.4, 1.9? What did you
Right.
do to actually arrive at those numbers?
Right, so in Barry Isaac, they scored a 3, and their 10% weighting on that is 1.4.
So there's formulas in this chart that I didn't make, that we borrowed this matrix that I believe it totals off at the end of the
Right.
column 21.
Yep.
And then it's divided and then it's turned into the 10% weight of that.
So they take 3 divided by the 21, and when you take 3 divided by 21, you get this 0.14, and then they multiply that by 10 to get you out of 100.
Gotcha. That's
And
what
so
I was-
there's the 1.4.
That's what I was working
Yep.
the math
So that's
on.
why these totals over
Okay.
here matter. The ones that are numerical are a little simpler, but, yeah.
Right, the green columns are the ratings.
See, I know,
And value.
ask a math guy.
Now, was I right? Because you just checked me.
You,
I just wanted that on the record. I just wanted that on the record. That he appreciates it, but he still checked me.
I do. Trust but verified.
That's
you
fair.
wanted to make it work, right? So,
Okay.
go ahead, Bill.
And the total at the bottom is the sum of those figures in yellow.
Yes.
I checked that already.
You didn't ask?
So,
No,
you had said that you were going to explain how you arrived at the $4,000 plus 7%.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
So
an interesting
that's-
point,
That's
too.
Dewey Engineering and their cost for, so they have a range. So there's the $0 to $100,000 capital project value. There's a 100 to 300,000, then there's over 300,000. Each one of those have a different percentage in lump sum. So for me to fairly evaluate this, I took the sum of all of our capital projects and found out what's the average cost of one capital project over a 5-year period. That number was, it's in here in green, $103,098.
I see that, yeah.
So I took that times the 7%, added 4,000, came up with my percentage,
Okay.
and divided it up, so it's 7.04% based on our average cost of a summer capital improvement project.
For all the children watching at home, you will use math.
Yes, right.
When you grow up.
But maybe not necessarily.
Spreadsheets are fantastic.
Sometimes.
And the orange is the only thing that's somewhat subjective in this. Everything else is fairly evaluated. And again, the orange, that the Dewey number, the Remington, and the Reynolds, I had to plug information on based on, they didn't give me a standard answer in the proposal.
Okay.
And the bottom numbers, so Dewey was the highest, 68.03.
Higher is better.
And you can see the others in there, we have a lot of close seconds and thirds. So the goal of this is really to decide how many people you'd like to interview for this, to award this. It can be 1, 2. Do you want us to propose someone? Do you want to look into us? We brought all of the proposals with us, so if you'd like to take it home and get some fun reading tonight or over the weekend, you can certainly do that.
I'd like to kind of understand why why each one scored lower or higher in each different area. Do you know what I'm saying?
So you want to pick any one of these to some degree?
So maybe starting with the first one.
Okay,
Like some
so-
have 3s and some have 4s.
So just, everyone had a paragraph or a page to talk about what they believe we're asking for. And as I read through them, some of them just didn't hit the mark exactly knowing what we wanted. Some of them knew exactly what we wanted. So 4 was the highest number. If I gave them a 3, it was because they didn't seem to get the big picture of what we wanted.
So how much of a pain would it be to make this chart, instead of in numbers, to make it in words, right? Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, this is what they're offering and this is in words instead of numbers. You know what does that make sense? Like for the 3 represents this is what they were missing, right? And the 4 is that they got everything. And if we did that, I think it would be easier for us to compare, because there's so many different categories that they're being, and then you can decide what things are important, right, and what things aren't as important. But I think if these 6 people, I mean, it's pretty extensive to submit all of this, and they're all pretty close. I would want to hear them all out, because I think a lot of this stuff, some of it's some of it's them guessing, and I would want to hear them all out and hear them explain why each one of them is, why they think that they can do a better job than the other ones. And then it's up, and then when we hear all of those reasons, I think it would be helpful to figure that out.
So you're asking for that as part of their interview process?
Yes.
Or the scoring?
Well, the chart thing would be outside of, the chart thing would be outside of interviewing them. Interviewing
Right,
them would be a
this-
separate thing.
This is to help this group decide who do we want to bring back
Right.
to have a face-to-face
Right.
interview with.
So to me, this takes out the emotion, right? This is the intent of this, is to take emotion out of the equation, and I'll speak for you. And strictly work with the numbers, right? The scoring, its intent to take the ambiguity and emotion out of this. And I agree with you, Michael, it narrows it down. It's like a funnel, right? So it's narrowing down the folks we'd like to bring back for an interview. Yes.
Sorry.
So the inflation, I know that they're guessing at that, but are they held to that in any way?
Yes,
They'll be
that's
held to
their
that.
firm.
Okay.
That's what's in their
Well,
proposal.
All right, and then for references, so it's just purely the number
The
of
number,
references
right.
received?
Okay.
Okay, and then that was given a 5% weight out of your total score?
Right, so that's important, but again, it's probably the lowest criteria.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, because
But
you
it
can't
checks
judge
out
someone on the
Some of
number
all
of
these-
references that you receive. I
Right.
don't
Right.
think
These are
that's
good
a fair-
candidates, it's just
Yeah.
how much better is someone than another.
Well, I would, in my mind, the one, you said Barry Isaac is architecture He's
Engineering.
an architect, or
Engineering.
he's an engineer?
They're the-
Oh, it's one that was
EI's architecture.
Crabtree is an architect.
Crabtree,
And
right?
Right.
So these guys are A's and E's.
Well, your reference is
Yeah,
like.
but they're still going to have the engineering services. They're still
They're
going
gonna
to
have the
provide
services,
all
it's
of
whether
that.
they sub them out or.
But they're
they have
subbing them out,
in-house.
right.
It's
Right.
Yeah, I
relative
mean, that
to
does
where,
make a
who they
difference
have,
to me.
and they
Right.
subcontract out the work, whether it's architectural or engineering, sorry.
Right, so either way, you're,
Yeah.
Anyone that subbed it out, when we looked at the people that they are subbing out to, they're good candidates as well.
but I mean, some of this is, like, you know, when you're talking about whether they described our needs appropriately, how important is the thing that they didn't describe? You know what I mean? That to me is like, it's kind of
10% weighting.
subjective. A lot of these things are subjective, and when the numbers are this close, it's hard, it's hard to, it's hard to really compare each of the different companies. I would want to hear, I would want to give them all an opportunity. There's only 6 of them. I'd want to give them all an opportunity to plead their case and explain their proposals.
We're down to 6 from 39, that's the way I look at it. We're
Yeah,
down to
6 is not that many.
But I'd rather be down to 3.
6 is a lot. don't you think?
I'd rather bring 3 back.
I'd rather be down to 3.
Dr. Barr, did
to
you
be
say
quite
that
honest.
I'm sorry, and Kelly, I'm so sorry, did you say that the total score at the bottom is the adding of all of the yellow numbers?
Yes.
Okay,
And Bill
so
checked it.
if and Bill checked it,
Verified, yeah.
so if we just took out the references, because I'm not comfortable with that, it would, then we would just subtract whatever that is, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay,
And really, the references beyond, I mean, it does, since Dewey did have a higher number, it gave them roughly 1.5 points. So even if you subtracted 1.5 points off
Yeah.
of them, because the other companies are fairly equal. You know, Remington has a little advantage, but it's only 0.5 point, 1/4 point. So it's not significant to the other 5. But
Yeah,
I
but
agree
then
with
even
you
the
when you
last
look at
one-
it, because I think if we had
Yeah.
said to Reynolds, hey, we want as many references as you
Yeah.
can, they would have
Yeah.
gotten us 32
well, that's
maybe.
what I'm saying,
So-
like, you know, if you told me I need
So-
3
Part of your score is
references,
gonna be
and then
the
I gave
number
you
of references.
25.
So a couple things that we
Like,
talked
wow.
through that I want to make sure we say out loud. First of all, and we said this when we went into the RFP process, right? Dewey is currently doing this work for us, and this is not an indication of the
Right.
work that Dewey's been doing.
Right.
I agree.
Right, so I want to publicly say that as many times as we can.
Right.
That this is my recommendation, that we look at services on a regular basis to make sure that we are getting the best price and the best service for the district, right, for what we're doing. This especially is such a large ticket item every year, year in and year out. It is vital that this firm is the one that we, you know, feel is best for Pennridge's needs. One of the pieces that we've had conversation about is engineering versus architectural. And so I do want to ask Mr. Harper, because he's had some experience with this with other districts, as to whether he has an opinion as to whether it matters and to what extent does it matter that you have an engineering versus an architectural firm. Because what I think I heard you say is that it has to do with the difference of they have to work with people as opposed to it being in-house. My guess is the engineers would have to work with architects, but that is less of a need for the projects we're talking about, so there's less going out of the house.
Correct.
And so from your experience, or as you looked at, you know, the 2 architectural firms, how big of a deal is that to you, and what would you have the board consider around that conversation, or not?
I would say the ones that are primarily architects, that's a minus for me. We're primarily looking at engineering services, that's, I don't know if I could put a fair number on it, but probably 90% of what we're looking for here. The architectural piece, while they might be good management of some of the engineers that they hire, it'd be better to have the engineers do the work and manage it.
Okay.
I agree.
Now, in your experience at the other districts you've worked in, have you ever worked with a primarily architectural firm for these services?
Yes,
And so you feel as though that model was inferior to the engineering model for what we're talking about, within your experience?
yes. My
Okay.
experience is the engineers, or the architect came in, did a study, and it had to be redone by the engineers 2 years later.
Okay, okay, well, that's helpful, in terms of that piece.
But that probably depends on the company too, right?
And it depends on what kind of things you're looking for. If you're trying to renovate a building, or if you're looking at just capital improvements.
Right.
My prior district, they let things go till it was a total renovation. That's more architectural. So that fits that profile, but they were also looking district-wide at all capital projects as well. So maybe that was a better fit for them.
And that's
For
why I had
here.
heard some people comment before that they felt it would have been better to have someone architectural for a lot of the work that we had before because it was more of those kinds of projects. But now that those things are built, it's more of an engineering focus.
I would agree.
We definitely-
And I will tell you, KCBA struggled mightily with their engineering services when they built this building.
So that's.
It was a problem.
Yep.
And they are primarily an architectural firm.
Oh, absolutely.
Right,
That's
no,
what
I
they
was
were.
asking, I was clarifying to
Yeah,
make
no,
sure that,
that's
okay.
absolutely what they
That's- yep.
were, but they obviously did, they went out,
Right.
subcontract
Right.
with engineering firms, and that was a real issue.
Mhm.
Wasn't the only issue in the building, but it was a real issue.
Is one
Yeah,
thing.
I think anytime that you're going to say, well, we'll rely on them to go find the engineer, and that's, I mean, it's kind of.
So they could satisfy the bid specifications, but would it be an efficient process? Probably
And that's
not.
my other concern, is that it's going to take a lot
So-
more time. It could take more time.
So let me ask a question about Reynolds specifically. Was part of the bid requirement for them to provide a cost for the summer project fee?
Yes,
So that's essentially a no bid. You put a placeholder in.
I put a placeholder because they wanted, their answer was we would negotiate that on
I'm
a
just
job by
saying.
job. Right, they did not give us,
And
I'm
that's
not
sort of
comfortable with that.
Remember,
I
we're
mean, I
not-
understand that you can get better prices, but.
Remember, we're not doing a bid here, we're doing
I
an
understand.
RFP. So
I understand.
that negotiation is generally a part of this process. It can be a part of this process, and that may be their standard, the way they do it. You know, they come back and do it on a per project basis and determine fees. So, it's not that we ask for a specific bid in this process, because it's a professional service.
Okay. But part of that was to provide a cost.
Part of it is what we asked for was a
Right.
cost.
Right.
You're right in the fact that they
Right.
did not do that.
Right. So that's just my concern with that firm. You know, and again, they're wanting to negotiate it
Yeah,
on.
like every time we
Yeah,
have.
right.
to-
I'm not in love with that concept.
Sure.
Could you find out from them, or did you already ask them, and maybe you said this, I'm sorry, what their, could they go back and give you an example, like with this school district that we work with, it ended up being X percentage of their projects, summer
Right.
projects that we work.
we did not communicate with them. We just merely scored this, brought it here. If that's something you want us to do,
That would
we
be the
could reach
interview.
out.
Well, I
And-
mean, if you feel like there'd be value in seeing that from them, you read
And-
their proposal, like if you would want to hear
Right.
more from them, then that would be one thing I would ask.
Here, you look at the numbers, they're in second place technically.
Yeah, technically.
And the other thing I'll ask, Dr. Yarnell, if I recall, weren't they involved with the tech school?
They certainly were.
So would you be willing to share the experience?
It was pretty ugly.
I just want to,
They have a reputation, as I understand, very good in some places and very awful in others. The folks at the tech school, Palisades had worked with them, they liked them. It was one of the reasons that they were at the tech school. I think a lot has to do with who's on the site at the time.
Yes.
Agreed.
And we had someone who I don't think did their job.
and how many times did we have to pour the machining floor?
3, maybe?
I'm just,
No, that's, I remember,
I'm-
I seem to
That's-
recall these
It was not
conversations.
pretty.
yes. We did,
So I won't vote for them.
Yes.
Just because of that.
so I share the
If
experience.
you want to interview them, fine, but they're not going to be a choice that I'm going to.
In full disclosure, I was on the tech school at the time, so I'm aware of this. That's why I asked if you would comment on it.
Well, and again, we have another situation where they were asked to give numbers and they didn't. I have a hard time with that.
So anyway,
I feel as though the board needs to make a couple decisions
Yeah.
in term, because one thing you could look at and say, we're happy with Dewey, we're done, right? They have the highest number, that is a possibility that we could move forward from that standpoint. It's not my personal recommendation, but no, I'm not sure we're at that stage yet, but in terms of, because I think it makes some sense to then talk to some firms to ask some of the clarifying questions you're asking. I think the board does have to make a determination as to whether they're comfortable talking to an architectural firm or firms or not, because that obviously does dictate in terms of what that looks like. One of the possibilities as you look at numbers is to figure out how many you want. One of the recommendations could be to interview a couple engineering firms and maybe one architectural firm to kind of see how you feel about the architectural and what those questions look like. So you could look at Dewey and Reynolds, that from a numbers standpoint, they are the highest numbers. The next engineering firms are a little further behind them. And then the architectural firm that is, that tied for second, third piece, but has low fees would be Crabtree and Rohrbach. That if you look at their pricing, their summer fees are the lowest. And so that is a numbers game when you're
Right.
talking about costs. If you wanted to see architectural, you could include them. Spanis Clemens has made the suggestion that perhaps you speak to all 6 of them and you bring them in. From a timeline standpoint, we have built in some time for interviews in May so that we could provide you with the information, get your clarifying questions, right? We can scan and send you any or all of the proposals. Maybe the proposals of the companies we decide to interview, we could scan and send them to you so you could review them, ask questions. Mr. Harper, Mr. Dahlbert would probably be able to answer most of those questions, but if not, we could have those for the interviews. We would have them come in, maybe do a 30-minute presentation, have 15 minutes for question and answers to be able to go back and forth, and have a couple groups come in. We'd have to decide whether we do that on a night like this or whether we do a separate night, and that probably depends on how many firms you choose to bring in, and how long you're willing to sit from that standpoint. So,
And we've done that before where we've had interview nights for different things, and then, whatever board members want to come, and whatever ones don't, and, sit through and do all of the interviews, so.
Can I ask a question, because some of these firms I know and some I don't. I know EI is basically out of Harrisburg. They're the ones who've done the demographic surveys for us prior to the most recent 2, I believe, but they did a number of them. Reynolds is somewhere in the King of Prussia area, as I recall. Obviously, Dewey's in Bethlehem. And Mr. Isett is, I believe, also local. But Crabtree and Rohrbach, where are they located? And do they have an office here?
Mechanicsburg.
Okay.
And most of these have small satellite office scattered throughout the
And
state.
that is a concern to me. It's not on the scoring rubric, but I do think that it's helpful to have someone who at least is King of Prussia or Bethlehem, someone local, as opposed to halfway across the state.
Part of the services is, do we have a problem, we want them to come out and look at it? They're likely gonna charge travel time and all those other costs, they're just gonna add up.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting because when you look at their pricing, though, they give us the lowest price of all of them. So I would assume
For?
that they build in their travel time.
I wouldn't assume.
No, not for,
Well, it's in their price. I mean, they can't say, I'm gonna charge you this, but
That's their
here's
average
these other
hourly
fees.
rate. I don't see that you didn't ask them
So the bottom one
specifically
is about the
travel time.
projects.
the bottom one is the projects, right? That's their administrative fees, if you will.
Construction manager.
Yeah, but when you're looking at the hourly rate, that's not where the biggest chunk of your money comes in. The biggest chunk of the money that you pay is the percentage they charge on top of the projects. That's where your biggest, that's where your biggest
clarify.
expense is.
The hourly rates are for supplemental services outside of the capital planning and the summer projects. We have a big crack in the wall out here, we think it's foundation. We would call someone like this in with a structural engineer on a time and material basis. That's where that fee structure would apply.
which is why it's only 5% of the weight. It is not a common occurrence, but you
Correct.
would have a one-off that you would need
Still have to
someone.
account for
Right, but when you're bidding out $1 million projects and you're paying a percentage on that, that's where most of your money is going to be spent, not on that hourly rate to fix a crack in a wall.
So with that hourly rate, then, would it apply to travel, do you think? Or you would need to ask that specifically?
I thought there were certain reimbursables listed in our RFP, and I believe reproduction of blueprints, travel time, copies was all an additional to this base price. For things that are not part of the capital projects though. So them developing the capital project and providing us with that literature, documentation, that's in their bid. But when we asked them to come out to do another service, if they needed to do drawings for the crack in the wall, that would be additional, every part of that.
So just to keep it in perspective, Meg, 0.5% on $1 million is $5,000. Just to keep it, so that we're,
Right, and you're
Thinking
looking
about
at an
that.
you're looking at an hourly rate that's $100 and some dollars.
I understand.
And you're talking about sometimes multi-million-dollar
No,
projects.
I
All right.
personally, are you gonna?
All right, so let's,
Yeah.
yeah. All
Let's
right,
do that,
what?
what you're about to do.
Let's have the discussion. So Joan, all right, couple of questions, as Dr. Bolton has indicated. Do we want to bring a few firms back, or we want to bring them all back? I'll start with that one. Knowing that this is going to be multiple nights,
In
and,
the interest of time and not, respecting these people.
Yep, sure.
I mean, if you guys are already,
well, I'm going to tell you, if based on the experience I've had with Reynolds and up at the VOTEC, they would be a no to me.
and
And they're definitely a no for me.
They're going to be a no-do, yeah.
so I think to be respectful of them, like, don't waste their time.
Right. I don't want to waste anybody's time in this
Sean,
process.
didn't you work with Reynolds at your old district?
Yeah.
What was your experience?
We probably did, a new high school building and renovated probably 4 other buildings while I was still in Mifflin County, and we had Reynolds as construction manager on all of them. There was a separate architect, so the construction manager was brought in to oversee the construction and to really make sure things were, from a day-to-day basis, watched and monitored on the construction site, much more than what an architectural firm would do. So that was their role for us, was specifically construction management. Project was put in place by the architect, was bid by the architect, and then Reynolds came in and oversaw the construction of that project. They did a fine job for us. We didn't have any problems with them on any of our projects, but like we said, in Mifflin County, we had one superintendent that I think his title was superintendent, that we liked and we requested and we got him for every one of our projects, because it was the guy that we liked and we had a connection with, and we knew that he went the extra mile, all the time for us. So it really has to do with who's on site.
So is that something that you can negotiate, obviously, is who you get, right?
Well, I think you could. I think the gentleman that I know worked out of their Harrisburg office and worked in the other side of that side of the state. So I don't know that, he would be available. I'm not even sure if he's still working anymore, but, so I don't know Reynolds enough to be able to say, hey, I want this, this person that you have, and to know what we were getting.
Because I know that conversation happened with Dewey too, that there's some people that are good and some people that aren't good. And so you got to make sure you get a good person no matter which company you choose.
Sure.
So Joan, back to the question.
So each one would take how long?
I think we would schedule 45 minutes. Does that seem fair? A 30, 15?
I've seen that, and you want at least 15 minutes to talk amongst ourselves
Yep.
before it gets away as well. It's at least an hour per
Per.
interview typically. It becomes a long night. if
Or
we go more than
multiple
3.
nights.
Well, I wouldn't mind interviewing, in my mind, maybe you do 3, but I guess if you want to get a picture of everybody, except for the one that are automatic no's, it doesn't make sense to me to have someone
Wasting
come and sit with us for an hour and kind of like yank their chain and I don't know. And I do think that there's something too, like you look one way on paper, but this is a group that you're going to need to have a good working relationship with.
Mhm.
You're gonna need to know them, so I wouldn't be comfortable just picking them without, interviewing all of them anyway, so.
And there is a soft skill part of this, or soft,
Oh.
and how they interact with the staff and the administration.
Absolutely. It's really
And
important.
the board, and the services they provide.
Things are going to
So-
go better if you have a good working relationship, so.
Okay,
I'm flexible, I really